We have a new game on our speedrun with the white pieces. We are rated 831. Our opponent Krivdos is 842. We start with c4. He responds with the principled e5 reverse Sicilian. I'm now going to follow up as I have in the past with g3 and develop my bishop along this long diagonal. He develops his knight towards the center, adding a little extra protection to his pawn and controlling the dark square. I'm just going to bring my bishop out and put pressure along the diagonal, all according to plan. So black should continue developing, which he does. He brings out his dark square bishop, puts pressure on our f2 pawn. No immediate threat. The drawback of this move, while it undefends this pawn, but that's not really relevant in this position. So we can just continue developing ourselves. We're going to develop this knight to the square we know it wants to go to. We already moved our c pawn, so we feel confident putting our knight on c3. He develops his king's knight to the f6 square and prepares castling. So far he's done the 4 sensible moves in a row. No one else has gone this far with logical moves, so I'm happy to see this from my opponent. So he develops the knight, adds a little protection to the light squares, and now it's our turn. We can continue developing. We just go d3. This protects our pawn, but mainly it opens up our bishop so that we can continue development. We could develop our bishop and pin the knight. That's an option. That also helps us gain more control of the d5 square since the knight controls it. In positions like that, you have to be careful about tactics like bishop takes f2 check. I take the bishop, and then he jumps in with the knight check. And when I move my king, his queen takes my bishop, and he wins a pawn, and my position's kind of ruined. So that's like a blunder that you can easily fall into. So that's why it's usually important to have this knight here defending it, so there's none of that shenanigans. So we could develop our knight. We'll just do that. We don't need to do anything fancy. I'm always looking for fancy stuff, but I shouldn't be. It's just a bad habit of mine. I always look for like the weirdest move for some reason. So he goes knight g4, double hitting my f2 pawn in a fried liver style attack, but I'm one move away from castling. Therefore this move doesn't actually make any sense. He's only wasting time, and after I castle and play h3, he's going to have to retreat that knight. Another drawback of the move is it undefends the center, so now I could jump my knight in with tempo while defending the pawn if I want. Might even be more accurate than castling. I'm going to do that just to see how my opponent responds. This attacks the bishop and protects the pawn. Of course, castling is probably the safer, smarter choice, but I had a feeling he was going to take anyway, in which case he takes our pawn with check. We obviously aren't going to move our king, we're going to take it, right? That's why we put our knight here. And now I don't know if he saw that the knight was defending backwards. Apparently he did and didn't care. But now we're up a piece. We just took 2 pieces, and he took a piece and a pawn. So we have an extra dark squared bishop in this position. So now the game is basically over. So how do we convert? Well, he brings his queen out to f6. What does this threaten? Well, it pins the knight. This isn't really a threat though. And either way, even if he jumps in and applies pressure, this knight's defended 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So that's not a real threat. What's the drawback? He's not developing his minor pieces. And you're supposed to develop minor pieces first, generally. It also walks into tempo developing moves, which are weird. Not that you have to play that. So what I'm going to do is I still want to kind of castle. So I'm going to castle my hand. So I'm going to put my rook here, and then I'm going to put my king here. And it's going to be as if I castled. And then his queen is going to be staring into my rook, which is really bad. So I'm going to do that. Line my rook up. And now I'm going to go king g1. And my king will be totally safe. So he jumps his knight in the center. What does this threaten? Well, these are all defended. And this forward jump square we can just take back with a number of pieces. Also, when I move the king, the rook will be defending. So now we're going to follow along with our plan and go king g1. I need to put a timer on. Hold on. Timer, stopwatch. Okay. d6. This connects the pawn chain, which is nice. So it defends the center. It also opens up the bishop, so it's ready to develop. Very nice. I mean, but on move 11, it's pretty late, you know, to be moving your d pawn on move 11. So I'm castled. His queen is staring into my rook. I can take pieces. There's so many things here. So for example, if I take his knight, right? Checks, captures, threat. I have no checks. I have 2 captures. Obviously, look at take the knight first. Then his queen is hanging. So if he takes your knight, he loses his queen. If he moves his queen, you just move your knight back and you have a free knight. So I don't need to look at other lines because this is clearly good. He has no intermezzo checks. He has no dark square bishop, so your king is safe on the diagonal. Right? This isn't actually weak. And now he realizes that his queen is hit and he doesn't like it. And he's not sure what to do. He might realize what happened. He might resign. And all we did was develop normal. And what they did was they moved the same piece twice that was already developed and started an unsound attack on my position. How can you solve that for them? Well, develop all of your pieces, move each piece once, get the rooks connected, bring them to the best position, and then start some type of attack. And then do an unsound attack. See, now he's thinking, but there's nothing to think about because the game is over. Because his queen doesn't have his queen has to move. He could sack the queen for the rook. I'll take the queen, and then he takes a knight. But it's not like he's trading a queen for a rook and a knight. He's trading a queen for a rook, a knight, and the knight I just took. So that's obviously bad for him. So he moves the queen. What's the threat? No threat. He's just dodging the rook. The drawback is I can move my knight. I have a free piece. So where do I want to move my knight? You could apply pressure this way because you can't actually defend this square at all and with any legal move. And if you move it and I jump my knight in and you move your rook, well, then my knight's stuck. That's not cool. So instead of getting fancy again for no reason in a winning position, let's bring our knight back to its normal square where it came from, around the king, and it even can one day maybe hit the queen if it needs to open stuff up. He develops the bishop and hits the knight. I encourage this trade. I'm up pieces and I would love to have the only bishop on the board. So as far as I'm concerned, go for it. I'm going to hit the bishop and encourage him to take. The drawback of my move is that it weakens the g3 square. However, he has no pieces, especially. Okay, so he took my pawn, and now I'm going to take his bishop, and then he's going to take my pawn, which was the drawback of my move. And then he probably thinks that it's some type of perpetual, but I can move my bishop back. Like maybe he thinks I'm going to leave my bishop here, and then I'm going to move my king, he's going to take, and we go back and forth. Even that doesn't make sense because I'm knight h2. So I'm just going to take the free piece, and then I'm going to move this back, and he has no army. And that's the problem with attacking without an army, right? You can't go to war with ghosts. I mean, maybe you could. I never tried, but... So he pushes the pawn. It attacks the knight. What's the drawback? It's undefended. We can just take it. We could also move the knight, but I'm just going to take it. This opens up the queen. He brings his rook. This creates the threat of taking the pawn and activating his rook into the game. We don't really want him to get too active if we can help it. I'm going to bring my queen to a very active square. This comes with a threat, but I have no intention of taking that. I actually just want to swing this over and offer this queen trade. I'm up 7 points of material, so if he takes the queen trade, it's obviously over. If he doesn't take the queen trade, I'm going to try to checkmate him. So he attacks the queen. It's just a superficial one-move threat. So I'm going to offer the queen trade along with my plan. My king's not in danger. It's just a solid move when you're up 7 points of material and this queen is the only thing in your camp. You know, it makes perfect sense to make a move like this. And now he's, I mean, even if he didn't want to trade, he has to trade because his queen has nowhere to go. Right? It has no escape squares because the knight would take it. So he has to trade. Even better. So I'm going to pre-move knight takes, which incidentally defends this pawn twice. He can kick the knight. I can go back maybe to h3 so the pawn stays defended. Or we'll see. And he goes back to e5. He's probably thinking, you know what, if I have to trade the queens, I'm going to trade on my terms. So white's going to take me, and then I'll get to bring my rook into the center. What's the drawback of this move? It actually hangs the queen. So that's not good. He takes, but the game's obviously over. I'm just going to block with my rook, which is protected also by the pawn. In case he kicks my queen again, it doesn't matter. Of course, he kicks my queen. I'm just going to retreat it here, which keeps the line of sight towards the king. It threatens things like bishop takes h6. And the game shouldn't last much longer. I only have a minute on my clock, so if I don't finish it, I'll just lose on time. And 10 minutes really isn't enough for me to talk and play and say what I want to say. This just hangs a rook, so I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm just going to take the rook. And now I'm up an entire army. He goes g6, but this doesn't even threaten my rook because the pawn is pinned. So I'm just going to ignore it, take this pawn and hit the rook. Multi-purpose move. He moves the rook and attacks my bishop. I'm going to do the most solid thing and just move it to this awesome construction of pawn bishop, it still eyes the king and now it's invulnerable. He brings his king to the side and attacks the bishop, which also attacks the rook. So that's very clever, but I'm going to set a really cool... I was going to set a trap, but he can't even fall into it. I'm going to go rook h5. I wanted him to take the rook so I could checkmate him with the queen, but now I realize the pawn is pinned. My development's too good. I can't even set up tactics because he's pinned incidentally, you know, just because my bishop's in a good spot. And now my rook eyes this. I don't know. I have to have some type of stuff, right? Let's go check. The pawn can't take because it's pinned. He has to go to a dark square. And I have 20 seconds and I have no idea. I'm just going to repeat real quick just to see what he does. Now I'm just going to bring the queen in on the dark squares. Oh, I'm in check. Luckily that doesn't make a difference, but and that's a checkmate. I had 9 seconds left, so I was just trying not to lose. That's why I didn't speak. I used all of my assets to cover these squares around his king. I was up so much material, it didn't really matter. And so you see a lot of these players keep going for this knight bishop combo, but that only makes sense in very specific situations when your opponent has trouble defending that square and also can't castle at the same time. If those two things aren't there, the moves don't really make sense. So hopefully they stop doing that. We have another game with Mingus Monk, 890. He's grabbing the full center like you're supposed to in chess. I respond with d6 and knight f6. This is the Peertz defense, the Perk defense. It lets white take control of the center, and then it attacks it later on in a hyper-modern fashion. Now, I developed this knight, and it hits the pawn. He brings his queen out to defend. This is ridiculous. Of course, you're supposed to develop your knights and bishops first. His queen is somewhat vulnerable to attacks. I don't need to do that just yet. His queen's also taking away the square from the knight. So I really don't like this move. It's so ugly. I'm going to play knight c6, developing a minor piece and attacking that pawn. He moves the pawn and hits my knight. What's the drawback of this move? Well, it gives up control of some dark squares. So I could jump my knight into the center, into those dark squares. Both hit the queen. This one's defended. This one comes with a different threat, but he can defend with his queen. So I'm just going to put it into the center on a defended square and hit the queen with tempo. I now have 2 minor pieces out. He's going to have to move his queen, and I'll be able to bring a 3rd minor piece out. So now you can see why moving the queen out is really bad in the opening. Because it gives your opponent, because the queen is so powerful, you don't want to lose it. That means that every time it's attacked, you have to run away. That's why it's really strong as a coordinating sniper piece. See, now he's thinking, but why'd you put your queen here? Every chess video you ever watched for beginners says don't move your queen in early. But they all do it. And I find it hard to believe that they have never seen a chess video. Just move your queen, please, for the love of God. I don't care where, just move your queen so I can go along with my life. Okay, so anyway, you can see that this diagonal is blocked, right? So I should develop my bishop to this way, to g7 diagonal. That makes a lot more sense, right? So he moves his queen, but decides to block his light square bishop. Terrible move. So now I'm just going to develop, like I said, and go g6 and bring this bishop to this open diagonal. Now that he put both of his pawns on light, the center is fully open on dark. So this bishop is going to be nice and strong. He moves his pawn and attacks my knight in the center. It's always nice to destabilize a knight in the center. The downside of this move is somewhat weakens this diagonal, but more importantly, it doesn't develop a piece. I kind of want to and have to almost move my knight back to d7, but before I do, I don't want to block my bishop. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity. Oh, there's a cool line. I was going to say use it as a tempo move to hit the queen and then bring my knight back, but his queen actually has this check, which double hits the check and the pawn. I could bring my knight back there. The queen can take the pawn. And what do I have there? I have knight c5 hitting the queen. He'll probably go queen b5 check again, but then I could bring my bishop back hitting the queen. Is it worth all of that? Probably not, but it kind of looks fun. And let's put him to the test. He has to prove that he can win with this extra pawn. I'm going to give him this pawn. Hey, he found it. Nice. I wasn't actually sure he was going to find that. If I block with the bishop immediately and he takes this, do I have any cool moves with my knight? Not really. That's unfortunate. So I'm just gonna retreat my knight and let him take this pawn as initially calculated, which he does. Now at first you can maybe kick the pawn, but usually this pawn's hanging behind it. In this case, the pawn's not hanging behind it. So you may just put yourself on a pin or something without much gain. On the other hand, this pawn's hanging. That's a central pawn. His queen's not threatening anything, and this central pawn is way more valuable than this b7 pawn, because if I can take this pawn without getting punished, I basically win the game, because his whole position collapses. His whole position revolves around this little shield thing here, also known as his center. And so even though you do have moves like this, I don't want to get fancy. I think I'm just going to take the pawn. And now he never has an e5 pawn push that I have to worry about, which is very nice for me. I am noticing, is my bishop trapped if he goes here? No, because I have a genius move. This. And you're like, what? This takes the knight and hits the queen. He has to do something with the queen, but the point of this is to move the knight off of the square with tempo. So then when I go bishop f5 next and he attacks it, I'll have the e4 square for my bishop, and also this pawn will be hanging on this diagonal. So luckily I have this intermezzo, but now he takes it away. He moves his queen voluntarily without me hitting it. What does this threaten? My knight. What's the drawback? Moving his queen. His entire army is sleeping. Meanwhile, I'm invading his home, and he's sleeping. But my knight is under attack, so I'm going to move it. In this case, I'm going to keep it extremely You could definitely go to c5. You could go to f6. Which one do I want to go to though? I don't really have time to think of which one I like more and why. I'm gonna go here. At the very least, it comes with an immediate threat. Defends the bishop. The one thing I don't like is it blocks the diagonal, but this is temporary. I'm sure I can try to win this pawn and then move the knight again. Of course, c5 is a nice square as well. He develops his knight. What's the threat? No threat. Maybe he's just developing in a weird way for some reason. The downside, I guess, knight on c3 is the more natural square because it defends the pawn that I'm attacking. Now I get to attack a pawn with tempo on the queen, so I'm definitely going to do that. And his center is now destroyed. I'm up one pawn because I gave him one pawn, but my position is winning. And if you don't, like, I'm only up a pawn, but my position's winning. And if you're like, I don't get it or I don't see it, it's okay. Just keep playing with more experience and more analyzing your games. You're gonna get the feel of what that means, and you'll know when you're winning. You'll know when you're up a pawn and losing as opposed to winning. So he moves his queen. What does this do? Well, it gets it out of the attack. It also threatens to win my knight. The drawback is he's still only moving his queen. So what are we gonna do? Well, we're just going to go back again to where we came from. We keep moving it back and forth, but we're not wasting time, as you can see, because he's just moving his queen every turn in response. So he moves his queen again in response to the attack. But now, we're going to put this bishop here and eye the queen this way. You could do something like c5 and attack the queen, but I want to get a little safer first, a little more developed, and then we can do these pawn moves, which are probably good anyway. But once my king is safe and castled, I know I could move this knight without ever worrying about a light square check. So he moves his queen away from the diagonal, avoiding any discoveries. What's the threat? It's no threat, just purely passive move. What's the drawback? Again, it's move 13. He moved his queen like 8 of those moves or something crazy. So now I have time to do again whatever I want. I can attack the queen again and then support that piece with the knight on c5. That looks pretty strong. I can castle. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to castle. Now my king is safe, right? Because I want you guys to castle before you do any attacking operation. Even though you'll slowly get better at realizing when you can do it, when you have time to do it, without castling. He develops his bishop. This attacks the pawn. That's the threat. Also, he can't castle through check, but maybe he'll kick the bishop and try to castle queenside. But it's my move, so I am going to put a knight in the center with tempo, because this hits the queen. He can't put his queen on a square that attacks the knight in return, which means I have time to do something else. I don't have to defend the knight if I don't want to. I was gonna say I have time to take this and win a piece, but he moves his queen directly into my bishop, so... And that's it. We got a nice easy game. Somehow 10 minutes is managing to be enough time, because luckily they end up blundering something crazy before the 10 minutes is up. But as I climb higher, I might need more time because I talk too much, because I'm trying to explain things. Hopefully this helps. Also, feel free to submit your rapid games and I'll review it, give you my feedback. Goodbye.